I have studied warfare my entire life since I was 7, 8 years old. And war is always hell for everyone. And it's always women and children who die in war. And peace is so precious to people who have seen war, because that's why we have United Nations. We have security councils. We have organizations like the EU and NATO to prevent war, because these people saw the Great War during the Second World War in 1945. People came together, nations came together and said, this should never happen again. We should never again see this kind of destruction to Europe that we saw during the Second World War, right? But what I see today is something that I never thought I would see in my life, is that peace is not valuable anymore. When you don't appreciate something, you lose it. Peace is not valuable anymore. I'm seeing a war that could have completely been avoided. Yes, it is the truth. NATO could have avoided this war. Ukraine could have avoided this war. Russia said no more NATO expansion to the east, no heavy equipment on Russia's borders, etc., etc. This is not impossible for the West to negotiate and find a deal for the sake of the children, for the sake of the women, for the sake of the innocent people. It's not an impossible deal to make and somehow find a negotiation. But the West said, we won't change a single bit. Not 1 inch will we change. We will not listen to you. Every nation has the right to choose. Ukraine can do whatever they want. Ukrainians got so many chances to surrender. They still today have a chance to surrender. They could surrender and sign Moscow's demands, but they refuse to do that, right? And what frustrates me here is that the West refused to listen to Russia. And now, instead of admitting that they completely failed the negotiations, they blame Russia and make Putin the big devil and anti-Russia, ban Facebook from Russia, ban TikTok from Russia, and everything should be anti-Russia, right? But in reality, this was a war that we could have avoided. And sometimes in the world, you have wars that you can't avoid. When you have a Hitler who conquers Europe, you have to fight, or you'll be destroyed by the Nazi Germany. When you have these kinds of situations as historically, you don't have a choice but to fight. But here, Ukraine had a choice. Ukraine did not need to fight. They could have signed these deals. Yes, when you negotiate, you won't always win. You will have to sacrifice some things. You will have to give away some things. But isn't that worth it? Isn't it worth it to put aside the ego, the nafs? Isn't it worth for NATO to put aside the big politician egos? Isn't it worth to put aside the pride? Just because you have a Russia with nuclear weapons who really, really, really is provoked by NATO, isn't it worth to try to find a deal just to avoid civilian casualties? Not to NATO. So we are being pulled into a war that should never have started. This war in Ukraine should never have started. Not a single shot should have been fired. Not a single bomb should have been dropped. And this is a war that could have been avoided. And that makes me so sad as a mystic that I see that peace is not valuable anymore to people. People don't care about peace. The young, they have hatred right now. The Western media is completely filled with hatred right now. It's just hate, 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 and anger, and hate and anger. And that hatred is just going to lead to more suffering and more wars into the future. And that makes me so sad. But for me, as a Sufi mystic, I choose the path of peace. I think that peace is worth negotiating for. I think peace is worth to put aside the pride and the ego, the nafs, just to get peace, just to have harmony among people. So I choose the path of peace. Russia is not my enemy. Ukraine is not my enemy. The United States is not my enemy. I don't have external enemies, and I choose to not create external enemies. My goal is peace, and my enemy is war. This is it. Hopefully this is helpful. Peace.